Everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tom Bliss. I'm the project manager here at Center for Healthy Sex. You can check out our website at centerforhealthysex.com. There's a lot of information there. There's recommended reading lists. We offer individual, group, and intensive therapies, so be sure to check out our website and explore. And I also want to draw your attention to our book that was published this year by Alexandra Katahakis, our clinical director, and myself. It's called Mirror of Intimacy, and it's a daily meditation book. If you go to our website, you can sign up for free for the daily meditations from this book. Please like our Facebook page. I hear someone say, great book, thank you so much. You could also leave a review on Amazon. Please like our Facebook page. It's at facebook.com/Center for Healthy Sex. And I had one more thing. Nope, that's it. So today I'm really excited to welcome Piper Grant. She has worked extensively with Center for Healthy Sex since I've been here I've been here 4 years, so you've probably been here 5 or 6 years. Piper is a trained family therapist. She works extensively with families and children on an array of presenting issues. She's currently a registered psychological assistant working under the supervision of Doctors Bill and Ginger Burkaw at the California Center for Healing in Pasadena, California. Piper has studied at the University of California, Santa Barbara, University of California, Los Angeles, and Alliance International University with a focus on reproductive health, the physical and psychological facets of human sexuality, how traumatic sexual experiences both mentally and physically impact future sexual relationships, and the realms of clinical treatment for sexual dysfunctions. Dr. Grant has conducted research that examined the psychosexual impacts on adolescent girls viewing online pornography, which relates directly to today's lecture. As an ASEC trained sex therapist, she specializes in working with individuals and couples on issues related to sex, intimacy, and trauma, as well as her family and children work. So welcome, Piper Grant. Today's lecture is called Online Pornography and Teens. I'm going to give it to you. And
all right, everybody, I'm going to slide on over here because I'm actually in the office at CHS. Thank you so much for joining us here today. As Tom said, my name is Dr. Piper Grant. I'm just going to get straight into everything. I appreciate the introduction by Tom. I want to let you guys know that this is a topic I get really excited about, I get very passionate about, and so I can start talking fast, I can start moving fast, but I really want to make sure that you guys get the information that you're looking for, that hopefully I can meet your needs in joining us today with this presentation. So please feel free to shoot questions on the message board or on our Facebook page as I go through the presentation. I'm also going to try and spend some time and make some space for questions throughout the presentation. But let's just get right into it because, like I said, I get excited. I have a lot of information, and I want to disseminate that information to you guys. So let's just talk about, let me just make sure this is going to go through. Sorry, click next. Let me talk about where we're going with this presentation, why I think that this is a presentation that's important, and what I hope for you guys to get out of it today. What I really want to do is draw our attention on more of a community public level to the increasing use of online pornography by adolescents. And what I really, really want to focus on is thinking about what is the content that our adolescents are being exposed to, what are they looking at, and therefore how is that shaping or impacting their values and beliefs, their behaviors, their perception of self, their ideas about intimacy, relationships, and health. And so that's what I'm hoping today to look at is one, talking about how they're accessing it, why they're accessing it, what are they accessing, and then what is the research and the literature telling us about how this is impacting them neurologically, behaviorally, their attitudes, beliefs, and then also what we can do to talk to our teens about this. Whether you're a clinician, a parent, a caregiver, an auntie, an uncle, a grandma, a grandpa, whoever you might be, these are conversations that need to be had with our adolescents and our preteens, actually, today. So we're going to talk about that. I also am going to try and touch base on sexting. While that is not directly, obviously, online pornography, we're finding whether you can say it's an impact of online porn or whether it's a sexualization of culture in general, we're finding an increase of sexting by adolescents and preteens. And what that's now considered is actually child pornography, and it's illegal in many states. And so I want us to touch base on that just as a way, one, to disseminate information about the laws around that, but also for us to have that in our consciousness and be thinking about that. So again, let's just get right into it. Why do I think that this topic is important? Well, we know the porn industry is massive. It has larger revenues than Microsoft, Google, Amazon, eBay, Yahoo, Apple, and Netflix combined. It's not going anywhere. It's been around for a long time. Now it's online. We have easier access to it. People can make porn easier. It's there. It's big, and it's only growing. What we're finding is statistics are telling us the average age of exposure to online pornography is 11 years old. You might think that's young, but actually what I believe is that the statistic, which is from a few years ago from a nationwide study, is actually a little bit behind, because I would say it's increasing. Just in my clinical work here in California, so I'm not going to generalize nationwide or worldwide, I am finding that children are being exposed to pornography more around the age of 9 and 10 years old now. Whether they're directly seeking it out or they're just coming across it by accident, we're finding younger and younger age of exposure because we have our children starting to use electronics and technology from a younger age, and they're tech savvy. So we're looking at a pretty young age. A telephone survey, this was done in 2007. So again, what I want to highlight is when I'm pulling data from something that might feel a little bit dated, I'm going to highlight it. And the reason I want to highlight it is also to recognize that there's a lack of attention being paid to this topic. And yet, I'm going to tell you clinically, I'm seeing most and many of my adolescents that I work with and children talking about pornography, socializing around pornography in terms of there's conversation around it, and also just being exposed to it. But what we found in this telephone survey from 2007, again, so I'm going to postulate that it's probably higher now, but I think it's important to look at, is that between the ages of 10 to 17, we found that 42% of the users were exposed to online pornography in the last year. And we have up to 90%, if not over 90% of our adolescents being exposed before the age of 18. So our teens are looking at it. Our teens are accessing it. How are they accessing it? We are talking about online porn here, and so obviously our first thought is, okay, it's online, it's through the internet. I want to highlight this, though, because I myself have been caught in this, despite the fact that I find myself tech savvy. I do this research. I know what's out there. I know what our kids are looking at. Yes, we can access the internet via anything now, almost like via our phone, our computers, our tablets, but there's other ways that we access the internet. And maybe as a parent or a caregiver, we're not always thinking about everything that has access to the internet. So I highlight iPods, game consoles, smart TVs. So they, for instance, I had an iPod and a number of years ago. I had a roommate, and her small cousin was visiting, and he had asked to borrow my iPod to play Angry Birds over the weekend. Sure, not a problem. I just listened to music on there. It was not anything that I really used the internet for, so it was nowhere on my mind. And at the end of the weekend, 7 years old at this time, he came back to me and said, "Piper, I did something." And I said, what was going on? And what happened? And he said, "I looked up sexy girls on YouTube." And I was shocked because at the time I was just in my doctoral program starting this research, and I was like, oh my gosh, see, you can access it anywhere. And while YouTube looking at sexy girls is not online porn, I think it really, really highlights that our kids can access this material in multiple ways. One of the things that makes accessing porn online so attractive, both for adults and for children and adolescents, is that you're anonymous. It's affordable because there's a lot of free online pornography. There's a lack of age and geographic barriers. So while we need to be 18 years old to access online porn websites, what we find is that, and if you've ever visited a porn website, what it says is, are you over the age of 18 or put in your birth date? Click yes, or, put in your birth date. And I'm telling you, our teens and our young teens know all they need to do is click yes. No one's going to come from the website, check their ID, or anything like that. So there's not so many age barriers to get through. As I mentioned before, we have a significant number of our online pornography sites that display free content, and it's readily available, so adolescents don't need to pay to access any of these websites. They don't need to subscribe to any of these websites. I'm going to get right into why we're finding that adolescents are accessing online pornography. What's the function of the use for them? And what we find is that the literature indicates that adolescents and young adults are using online porn as a tool for sex education. And this, to me, poses high risks for impacting their ideas about sex, sexuality, intimacy, relationship, because really, when we go into looking at what is the depiction of sex and relationships in porn, which we're going to get into, it's really based on unrealistic depictions of sex, and it's not really comprehensive in offering a healthy message. When you think about maybe an adolescent who isn't receiving comprehensive sex education, and by comprehensive sex education, I don't just mean like what are your genitals and how do you protect yourself from getting an STD or getting an STD or getting pregnant, but I'm really talking about relationship. How do you talk about communication between partners? What is it to be relational? What is it to be intimate with somebody? And when you're looking at porn and you're looking at the depiction of sex in porn, there's really a lack of portrayal of any of that, which we're going to talk about. So highlighting the fact that if we have adolescents seeking out online pornography for educational purposes, really thinking about what are they learning. There's been a number of cross-sectional studies and surveys done of adolescents looking at why do they seek out pornography. And one of the most common reasons is that they feel like they can learn new tips or learn tricks or they gain information or knowledge. So that really speaks to that educational purpose for them. Also, sexual curiosity is definitely high up there as well. What we sometimes find actually is that adolescents might be sexually curious, then stumble across porn, and then get into more educational purposes. But however that order might go, sexual curiosity. I came across a girl who was wondering about, she had heard the term blowjob, and so she didn't have anybody to ask, and she just typed it into her computer, and you can imagine what came up. So it was really innocent. She wasn't seeking anything out, but she had questions. She was curious. She was hearing things. She didn't have answers to it. And so sexual curiosity is very normal. We just have to think now about how are our kids gaining information? Where are they going to gain that information? Sexual arousal, also very common in adolescent years. Your body's changing. You're starting to feel things in your body, obviously very typical. What we do find is that males tend to use online porn more for sexual arousal than females. But I'm telling you, I still have a lot of females that are using online porn, young girls that are using online porn for sexual arousal and start at a very, very young age. It's something that is openly maybe talked about amongst social groups, whether it be males or females. And so you might have female adolescents starting to explore that, see how that does for their body. And as we get into this presentation more, I mean, if it feels good to them, they're going to keep doing it, essentially. And encouraged by others. This is definitely a mode of, or an access point into online porn, if I can say it like that, is that there's this social piece, and it's this form of socializing and encouraged by others, of that there's, a group might get together, and for both males and females, and they might be like, oh, did you see this video? Look at this. This is what I found. And I'm finding, actually, and again, just in my clinical work, so I'm not saying that this is a broad study, but that we have adolescents sharing material with them, and it is a form of socializing, and or if an adolescent doesn't necessarily engage in looking at porn, they might be encouraged by others to be looking at it like, no, you should check out this video, you should see it, you should see it. So there's that encouragement piece as well. Maybe there's that piece of wanting to fit in, and because there's the socializing aspect of it. One thing I want to highlight on the encouraged by others is that studies actually find that adolescent girls tend to be introduced to online pornography by older adolescent males. So maybe a girl has like a boyfriend who's a little bit older than her, or what I've actually seen before is there's a girl in high school and then maybe like wants to be, friends with the older boys, and so is encouraged to watch porn by them. So obviously different routes and modes and reasons for looking at porn, but all definitely important. And what we know in adolescent years is there's that seeking out of information, wanting to feel included, wanting to find identity, and all of these functions really speak to that, I believe. So we've kind of quickly gone through how they access it and then why they're accessing it. And I want to get into the meat of the portrayal of sex online, and so what they're really looking at. And like I said, I'm going to look at the portrayal of sex online, and then we're going to break it down by gender as well, because I want us to really think about what are the messages that our young boys and our young girls are receiving, and then what are the messages that they're receiving about the opposite sex. Whether or not they're heterosexual, just what are the ideas that they are conceiving and putting together in their mind about what it is to be sexual, what it is to be sexually attractive, what it is to be in relationship with somebody. Before we go into that, let me just check. Anybody have any questions right now about anything of what we just went through? All right, cool. I'm going to keep moving. And again, if I speak too fast, please let me know. But I just want to make sure to get through as much information as we can today. So when we look at the portrayal of sex in online porn, content analysis throughout the years, and actually I want to note one thing here. When we get into this part of the lecture, what I'm talking about is mainstream pornography. And so in the last few years, what we have found is there's been different genres that have popped up. Maybe there's genres in which women are in the power position. Maybe there's genres in which it shows more loving relationships. All of that true and great. But when we're talking about adolescents are not likely in the beginning to be seeking out particular genres of online pornography. So we're talking about mainstream porn that's easily accessible, that's free, most likely, or affordable, but I'm going to say most likely free, and that really they can get into and out of quickly, right? Because there's always the risk of being caught. So most of what I am talking about is definitely looking at mainstream porn. Unfortunately, too, because of the research, a lot of the research is looking at heterosexual porn or heterosexual adolescents, or maybe adolescents that even haven't identified their sexual orientation. So I do highlight that, but I don't think that I don't think that devalues the information that I'm talking about. So starting again, content analysis really over the last few years has really showed that sex in online pornography is portrayed as something that's mainly a physical act. It's really something that's not relational. There's a lack of display of affection. There's a lack of display of intimacy, lack of connection. And it's really in which one person's pleasure takes precedent over another person's pleasure. You guys, I'm going to pause because I see that you're talking about backlighting. I'm going to see if I go like this. Does that make it better? Better. Okay, awesome. Good. Okay. I'm trying not to get distracted by the corner with the messaging, but I definitely want it to work for all of you guys, so just keep me posted. Okay, so what we know is that sex is then also, there's not just the relational aspect, but it's about sex being displayed as something that's readily available. And as I mentioned, it's in which one person's pleasure takes precedent over the other. It's not relational. It's not about each other's pleasure. It's not about a shared experience. And also what we find is that sex is displayed as something that's emotionless, it's consequence-free, there's a disconnection, and I think something that's so important that really gets missed a lot is it's an intense experience. And so as we get into talking about what are adolescents perceiving sex to be, when they're looking at online porn and it feels as though, and what they're seeing is something that's always intense, always sexually ready, always sexually available, always getting your partner off, however it looks to them, there's that expectation that sex should always be like that. I think the consequence-free is something that shouldn't be looked past. Now in California, laws were changed in which condoms need to be used in the filming of pornography. But as we know, we have the world and people can go anywhere and film porn. But you're looking at porn in which there's maybe lack of condoms, lack of consequences about pregnancy, STDs, or even what's it like to have sex with somebody and not have that relationship and not be relational. Where does that land for an adolescent? I want to talk specifically about gender in online porn because I'm going to say I'm excited about this, but I don't mean this in a positive way. When I started doing this research and I started looking into this topic, one of the reasons that brought my attention to this topic was that we had parents calling and saying, my adolescent is looking at porn, whether it's male or female, my teen is looking at porn, I don't know what to do. And it's not like they're just looking at porn once. I'm finding that every single night that they're looking at porn before they go to bed, or they're not doing their homework because they're distracted by porn. And at the time, we didn't have as many resources as maybe we have today. We weren't looking at this topic as much as maybe we are today. We weren't as aware of how porn impacts different parts of our lives as we are today. But the interesting thing, and this is the part that I find, I like I say, excited in a really kind of odd way, is that now we see how these were the adolescents. We have this cohort of young adults who as adolescents grew up with online pornography. And now we're seeing how it's impacting their lives through the years and through the decades and through their relationships. And so this cohort that grew up with online porn is now in their 20s, and we're looking at their difficulty with erection. We're looking at their difficulty with intimacy. We're looking at their feelings of shame when somebody maybe isn't ready to be sexual with them, or maybe sexually rejects them, if I can use that term. And what does that mean when you're rejected sexually? And so I don't know, from maybe a clinical standpoint, I get really excited, again, I say in an odd way, but to see how these kids are growing up and to have this cohort that we get to follow now. But let's talk about specifically men in online porn. There's a social construction of men in our society, which is basically, in order to be masculine, is all things not feminine, right? So it's to be strong and powerful and emotionally disconnected. And what it's assumed in pornography is that men are naturally competitive and aggressive. And in order to be more manly is to have more sexual partners. What we know is that male porn actors last longer in the porn industry than female porn actresses. And so if anyone, and I'm not saying adolescents are doing this, but if anyone's to be following porn, they're going to see the same male pop up more than they will the female. So they're going to see a male with many more sex partners than maybe a female. I think the biggest piece, though, and maybe this is stemming off watching these cohorts go through, is that men and women that are then sleeping with these men are perceiving men that they need to have these large, long-lasting erections, and that they should be able to have multiple sexual performances. They should be, a beast in the bed and have all this sexual knowledge of techniques and different tips and different positions, and that they should be able to make a woman orgasm. And this puts a huge pressure on not only our men from within themselves, but their partner, whether they are heterosexual or homosexual, their partner expecting that of them, right? To be able to maintain erection for a long time, to be able to have multiple sexual performances, to reach orgasm and then be able to engage in sex again. And I think what we're seeing now, because we're looking at this cohort of people who have grown up with porn, is we are seeing a lot of men with performance anxiety, with sexual dysfunction in terms of difficulty maintaining erection because of performance anxiety or because of watching a lot of porn and finding themselves only aroused mainly by porn rather than being with a partner. And equally, if we're talking about heterosexual relationships, looking at women expecting men to also be able to perform and being disappointed when their man isn't able to maintain an erection one time. So this pressure that's put on both the males and females is significant, and also to recognize that these are messages that are starting to be encoded at a young age when watching porn. I'm not saying that an adolescent, is making sense of how this is going to impact them later on in life as they're watching the pornography at age 13 or 14, but it's the messages that they're receiving. It's how they're making sense of the messages and what they think that means about themselves. In order to be sexual as a male, then, I need to be able to have a long-lasting erection. I need to be able to make a woman orgasm. I need to be able to know what to do in the bedroom. Otherwise, I'm not an attractive person. I'm not a good partner. I'm not a good boyfriend. When we look at the depiction of women in online porn, it's almost all things opposite of males. And again, I'm looking at mainstream pornography. What researchers have really looked at through content analysis and through different and through also some cross-sectional studies is the depiction of women as being sexually available, always having large sexual appetites, willing to please a man, willing to basically be satisfied with any sexual act that is put on them by a male, and really making them kind of in a one-down position, men above them, power up, they're subordinate to the male. What we find in content analysis of pornography is that there's a huge focus on women's genitalia. There's been studies looking at how many shots of males' genitals versus females' genitals, and overwhelming about 3/4 of the shots are looking at females' genitals, and really setting up this message of women's attractiveness. In order to be attractive, in order to be sexual, it really stems from their sexual appeal and their sexual abilities. And noticing that if they are not able to be, if they don't want to be sexual in terms of that sexual availability, or if they aren't super flexible or whatever that means, that then maybe they aren't attractive is the message that can be received. What we find a lot, too, is that there's a lot of violence or aggression depicted in porn. And that violence and aggression is often towards the female. And during that time, the female is often not questioning or saying anything, or even, I'm going to say, acting or putting out the perception that she's enjoying the sexual mistreatment. And so really speaking to that feeling of women are subordinate, they're inferior, and that they are it's okay, it's part of the sexual play to be a recipient of that violence. Depiction of girls. Okay, I put this in here because although we talk about the males and the females, and and as women and men, and we're talking about how might one perceive self when looking at that, how might they perceive the opposite gender, I really want to highlight the depiction of girls in online pornography. There's a huge part or genre within online porn of young-looking girls and calling it teens, right? Because technically, in order to be in online porn or in porn, you have to be over the age of 18. So they're 18 and they're 19. They're still teens. But what we know from the research and the literature and communication studies is that if a girl is more easily able to self-identify with the character depicted, they're more likely to adopt the values, beliefs, and behaviors portrayed. And so when we're thinking about an adolescent who might be viewing porn, come across porn, and see that there's depictions of teens, she or he actually might more readily adopt the behaviors of the adolescent being depicted. What I have actually seen before, and again, this is just from clinical experience, is you can also have a younger adolescent, maybe early 13, 14 years old, stumble across pornography, and it's called, teen porn. She sees somebody who's of the age, whatever they say, 18 or 19. And at that age, really that consumer, that adolescent girl is like, I want to be older. I want to be more grown up. I want to be able to be sexual with my boyfriend. And so really adopting the values and behaviors of that actress, the porn actress, and the depiction of what sex looks like with that teen. How are we all doing? Making sense? Anybody lost? Any questions about that? Okay. I'll keep on moving. So we're going to talk about the neurological impacts, then we're going to get into the impact on behaviors, we're going to get into the impact on values and beliefs. What we know is about the neurological impact of pornography. It is an emerging area of research. What we know is that the neurochemical response of viewing online porn is very similar to that of ingesting illicit substances such as cocaine, methamphetamines, or amphetamines. I think the really fascinating thing about this, though, is to know that when somebody ingests a line of cocaine, it can take up to 20 minutes for there to be a neurochemical response. When somebody is looking at online pornography, it can happen within seconds. I mean, literally 5 seconds. Everything's like firing and getting released, and all those yummy feelings in the brain are happening. So it's a much quicker response system. What we do know is that when somebody is looking at online pornography, not only are the limbic region and the ventral striatal regions activated, which is associated with emotions, behaviors, and our reward system, but what we also know is that during that process, neuroepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine is all produced and being released in the brain, and that creates a euphoric feeling. That creates that really good feeling, that high, potentially. And during this process, when epinephrine is released, it actually will solidify the image in the brain. And so the adolescent then is able to, at a later point, recall that image and actually maybe even re-experience a euphoric feeling in their body. And what we know is that at that time and during adolescence, the prefrontal cortex of an adolescent is not fully developed. And so they might be more impulsive. They're more sensory seeking. They're more, if I can use the word high, they're looking for more of an adrenaline surge or a high. And so when we think about what's happening in their brain when they're looking at porn, when we think about all these great things that are being fired in their brain, this euphoric feeling that's being created by the release of neuroepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, they're going to probably most likely seek out more. And not only does the literature tell us this, we see this if you're working with adolescents and you talk about porn use, if you talk about really anything that makes an adolescent feel good, they're going to struggle with whatever their morals, values, beliefs are around whatever that good piece item is, but there will be this piece of like, oh, but it felt good, I want to try that more, I want to do that more, I enjoyed that. And it also opens potential for the introduction of addiction feedback, that euphoric feeling. It feels good to them. Okay, I want more. I'm going to heighten, I'm going to increase that level. So their brains are not fully developed and obviously very impressionable at that time. And who doesn't like those yummy feelings being released in your brain? Whether you're an adult, an adolescent, a child, it all feels good to us. I want to talk about the behavioral impacts. What the research finds, excuse me, my glasses are moving and then it makes my headset move. What we find is an increase in risky sexual behaviors. And by risky sexual behaviors, what I'm talking about is sex without condoms, increased use of substances and alcohol with sex, and we actually find an increase in group sex as well. What we know is increased sex without condoms increases your risk for pregnancy, STD infections, HIV. We know about increased sex with the use of substances or alcohol, also probably increases your chances of not using a condom, also decreases any ability to make, or decreases your ability to make smart judgment, also kind of dampens that ability to be like, oh, here's a red flag, I should pay attention to this, and maybe not engage in this. So it does put our adolescents at risk. I think the increase in anal and oral sex is something really fascinating from more of a research perspective, and when we look historically. What we found is that when porn, not online porn at the time, but when porn started showing oral sex more frequently, what we found is that just within our general population, there was an increase in oral sex. So really the increase in the depiction of oral sex in porn normalized it, if I could use that. And then what we found is that more and more frequently in our general population, oral sex was being had. And we're actually finding the same thing with anal sex now. What we're finding is now the depiction of anal sex is very commonplace in porn. It's pretty normalized, and we're actually finding with not only in our general population of adults, but even adolescents are engaging in more anal sex. I think what's interesting, there was a study that was done across, I believe it was, let me just look, I want to see. Yeah, it was a study that was done in Sweden. So, and one thing I should note is I realized my reference slide is not included in these PowerPoints. So if you want my references, please feel free to reach out to CHS, and I can definitely provide you with my references. I'm happy to do that. But there was a study that was done in Sweden, and of the adolescent girls who engaged in anal sex, 39% of them reported no condom. That also comes to that belief of like, well, I can't get pregnant, but still very significant. You can still contract many STDs or STIs through anal sex. And of those who did have anal sex, 53% of them reported it to be an unpleasurable experience, and yet they would engage in it again. So how do we make sense of that, right? How then do we really think about why would you engage in something that doesn't feel good to you? And what are the messages that you're receiving as an adolescent? What are the messages that you're receiving that are being told to you in terms of if you don't do this, what does that mean about you? Also, we find an earlier age of sexual intercourse, not a huge gap, but there is studies to show that there is an earlier age of sexual intercourse once exposed to pornography, and aggressive behavior. And I think this is also another, maybe one of from the research nerdy standpoint of me, but for both males and females. So I think there can be the general assumption that it might be males that become more sexually aggressive, but we find is that both males and females become more sexually aggressive when exposed to online pornography. And sexually aggressive can range from anything of just like violating somebody's boundaries by squeezing their butt, or also then trying to force somebody into sex. So there's a huge range in that, but all aggressive behaviors for sure. I see that there's a question, so I'm just going to touch base on that. Okay, so the question is looking at, did porn normalize the behavior of oral sex, or did porn change to oral sex? Really, was the porn really reflecting changes within society? I think that is a good question, and you know what? I'm going to be honest with you right now. The research paper that I pulled for that one, I can't recall it in my brain, but if I do remember correctly, what it was looking at is how the introduction of activities in pornography, the pushing of boundaries in pornography, actually has an impact on the greater population, and by looking at how then those practices and behaviors are seen within the general population. Okay, moving on. My phone was sounding a little funny. Let's look at the impact on attitudes and beliefs. I'm going to quickly, briefly go through this because I want to make sure I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure that we get to sexting as well and communication. But what we do find is that there is an association between exposure to online pornography and increase in permissive sexual attitudes, uncertainties about sex, increased uncertainty about our own sexual beliefs and values, and really a more positive attitude towards uncommitted sexual exploration. I actually find this with adolescents to be really impactful. That, and if you jump down to the third bullet point, a decreased trust in intimate relationships. I find these connected, and also in my work with adolescents, adolescence is a time about being relational. You're trying to figure out what it's like to be in relationship with other people, whether that is as friends or partners. and there's this desire to be close and this desire to be intimate, and yet also socially it's kind of looked down upon for some groups for them to be in committed relationships, or that what it means in adolescence is to be sexually explorative. And so I actually do see that coming up a lot with adolescents, and I'm not to make it I don't want it to be thought that that's also just a female versus a male thing. I see that with both males and females as well. Gender attitudes for both males and females, again, that there's a stronger belief of women as sex objects. It plays out a little different, but what the research is showing us is that adolescent females do have an increased view of themselves as sexual objects. And in order to be attractive, which this is actually jumping a little bit down into the sexual and self-confidence piece, but in order to be attractive, they must be sexual, and they must sexually objectify themselves. And then for men it looks, or for boys, it looks more in just the objectification of women and being able to kind of use them, if I can use the term, as like sexual toys. And for both, again, males and females, less progressive attitudes about gender roles. I know for my aunties and for my grandma, who fought for women's rights, they're just, they're rolling right now on that one. It's like, no, don't do it. But it is something that we are finding. It's an impact that we are seeing. In terms of self and sexual confidence, and I think I touched on this a little bit before, but again, for both males and females, and I'm stressing both males and females because we often can go into a place of just, thinking, oh, that's only for the girls or that's only for the boys. And what we're finding is this is impacting both males and females. And what we're seeing is that it's really increasing insecurity about bodies. There's a pressure to look like the actor. So I'm not kidding. I'm talking about males who think that they need to have smooth skin or like shouldn't be really hairy. Also females who are thinking that their breasts need to be really large. I remember looking at a study in terms of pubic hair maintenance for females and how many females younger and younger are trying to wax their pubic hair and just ideas around that on both the male and the female side. Men assuming that or boys, I'm talking about adolescent boys, assuming that girls should have, no pubic hair or very little pubic hair, girls also believing that themselves. And so this is real, you guys. I'm telling you, this is out there. If you talk to adolescents, they're talking about these things. It's definitely topics of conversations for them. And really this idea of, in order to remain sexually attractive to my partner or to remain sexually attractive to whomever I want to attract, whether that's male or female, who do I need to be as a sexual being in order to attract them? All right. I'm going to have a little bit of a shift here into sexting, but I just want to touch base again. Any questions, any points, anything come up for you guys as you're listening to this? All right. Okay, we're going to keep moving then. I'm going to get into sexting. I have sexting in here, and when I've given this presentation, I include sexting because sexting is now legally actually considered a form of child pornography in the sense, and I'm going to break that piece down. But in the sense, let's talk about what is sexting. Sexting is the sending of sexually explicit material, whether it be a photo, a photograph, or a text, through mobile phones. We are seeing an increase in sexting, and that is for sure. We can definitely look at the data and the research around this. I gave a presentation to adolescents, I want to say almost 3 years ago now, and I was talking about sexting. And at that time, our data was telling us, if I recall correctly, it was about 17% of high school teens had been sexting. And now 3 years later, we're at 24%. I don't believe that this is accurate. I actually believe that it could be higher. This was just from a recent study done in 2014, I believe. Again, I'm happy to pull that reference. It's 2013 or 2014. But I actually would believe it's a little bit higher than that. I see somebody saying just 24%. So yes, I totally agree with you on that. But I want to stick to the data that's available versus maybe what we might be experiencing ourselves. But what we know is that adolescents will underreport these things. As they'll, tell us that they know everything and that nothing's going on with them. So they will also probably be saying that they're not sexting. What we do know is that teen boys will send more sexually explicit text messages, which is still considered sexting, and that teen girls will actually send more semi-nude or nude photos of themselves. I'm actually not surprised by this. That the boys are sending more sexually suggestive messages. They also might be the ones encouraging the girls to send images of themselves, and that the girls are not going to be looking for images of the boys, but going back to that depiction of girls and men and women, also that idea of what is it to be sexual. What is it if I don't send this sexual image of myself? What will he or she think of me if I don't send this sexual image of myself? And really still looking at themselves as adolescent girls as also a sexual object. In adolescence, that can actually make them feel a little bit more, I want to say empowered. I don't know if that's actually the word I'm looking for, but it might make them feel grown up, right? Like, look at my body. I have this woman's body. I can show you my bits and pieces, and I have total control over it. So there is something in that piece as well. Data telling us 15% of teens have sent a sexual image of themselves to a person they'd never met. You guys, I'm telling you, I want to highlight this point. I think that this is so important, and I say this because I've seen ramifications of it as well. A significant number of teens now have online relationships, and by relationships, I don't even mean that they say that they're boyfriend-girlfriend, which is significant. There is a number of them with that, but also just have close friends or whatever. The thing is our adolescents have not met the other side of that screen. They don't know who is on the other side of that screen. And so what we find is that our adolescents that are sending these images out there don't actually know who they're sending them to. And we don't know where that image is going to end up. And it's dangerous. That's all I can say. And I know that we know this as adults, but I think just even if teens knew that the dangers of that, and not just talking to them once, but really kind of going through some different scenarios of like, how do you know who this person is? Okay, they sent you that photo of themselves, but how do we really know that that's not a photo of somebody else? It's a big deal. It makes me nervous for our adolescents. Where is that photo going to end up? Who's looking at that photo? What's going on with that photo? So that's like a little bit of a soft spot for me. Why are we finding that adolescents are sending sexually explicit material or photos or videos of themselves? One, as a joke, okay, so ha ha ha, to feel sexy. I think that's significant. That really speaks to the content we were talking about before. And they felt pressured. 61% of teens report that that have been involved in sexting felt pressured. Huge piece of adolescence, right? Trying to fit in, trying to feel accepted, trying to find your place. And so when we're talking to teens about sexting, we need to talk about this pressure piece. We can't just talk about the safety measure, totally important, as I got really big and open about that before. Very, very important, and we need to talk about what it means for them to be sexting. But we need to address the pressure piece. We need to address where's their ego strength in being able to defend themselves away from that pressure? What's going to happen to them if they don't cave into that pressure? What does it mean to them? And then last but not least, and I think this is really important, more than half of sexters will share or receive images with more than one person. All right? So we've got more than half of the people that have received a sext, whether it be a text, photograph, or video, have not only showed one person, but they've maybe showed more people. Very, very important. There's actually an image on the next slide which I think speaks to that. I'm going to touch base with the questions here. Do kids in abstinent-only sex ed end up using porn less than those in more comprehensive sex education programs? All right, I saw 2 studies on this, and the quick answer is no. I can go into it a little bit more. Let me look at our time. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say the quick answer is no, but if we have some time at the end, I definitely would like to go back to that, how just even sex education in general in our schools, where it lacks, et cetera. What age is this most prevalent? What age is sexting most prevalent? We have most of our teens are starting to sex between the age of 13 and 16. So that's kind of our core age there. Not to say it stops at 16, but that's when we find that most of them are starting to sext. And by age 16, if we're looking at prevalence, I would say more middle adolescence. Okay, recommendations on addressing with their teens. So somebody is writing a question about how can we address this with their teens. Many parents say don't do it. Definitely, that's the go-to, right? And there is a lot of shame that comes around with that. I'm actually going to touch base on that on the next slide. So Cheryl, if you don't mind, if I don't answer your question on the next slide, let me know. Wondering how you know when to discuss basically all of these things. We're going to talk about that next as well. So again, for those questions, if I don't answer it, let me know. Are there apps for parents to be aware of with sexting? Good question. There's actually, let's see, there's monitoring filters and things, but in terms of being able to look, be able to have kind of a shared mirror screen, I guess, with their phone. I'm not aware of anything like that right now for you to be able to, like, basically, what it sounds like to me, be able to look almost in your own phone or tablet and then see what they're texting. But that is a really good question, and I know who I'm going to ask about that. So I am actually interested in that as well. I know a lot about filters. I know a lot about how teens get around filters, but I don't know specifically about an app for parents to be aware of sexting on their adolescent's phone. But I think I'm definitely I'll look into that. And then last question before we move on. Any information about the age group teens start looking at porn, and do they prefer to look at their own age group? Okay. Do they? No. Okay. No. So the question is asking, is there any information or studies available about the age group teens look at porn? Yes, there is. I can definitely provide my references. Like I said, we have most access. We have the first earliest age of access is age 10 to 11. Going into early adolescence, like 12, 13, 14, 15 is really when we're seeing increase in use. If you think about what's happening in the body's starting to get all these sexual feelings. There's starting to be talks about sexuality around them. So you do see an increase in use around that time. In terms of do they prefer to look at their own age group? No. So that in which case, yes, that would be classified as child pornography. No, I can't even recall a study in which, and content analysis and content studies in which adolescents were seeking out child pornography. Not to say that doesn't happen, right? But they're actually tending to look for the older people. They want to know, what are the older adults doing? Like, what are those older teens doing, right? So I said around the 18, 19 years old. But even older age people, they want to know what it's like to be an adult. What are the adults doing? What are if I want to be an adult, I'm growing up, I want to be sexual, what are you doing? So that's more, I hope that answers your question. So I want to get back to the impact of sexting because I think this is really significant, and then I'm going to jump into parent-teen communication, and then we'll be done. The impact of sexting is significant, legally and then also emotionally. I want to talk about the legal piece first. Now there is 8 states, yes, I believe 8 states that have enacted bills to protect minors from sexting, and there is 13 additional states that have proposed legislation. So what that means is not sexting in terms of a text message, so a sexually suggestive text message, but in which there is an exchange of an image or a video, anything that is of graphic visual content, okay? If there's any exchange of any of that content in which the person is under the age of 18, it's considered child pornography. Okay, this is really significant. I have given this lecture. I've talked about this with adolescents, both in a lecture format and obviously within a clinical format. And it's significant for our teens to know. It's serious. So even if a 16-year-old is sending an image of their genitals to their significant other who is 16 years old, that is still considered child pornography. That is still the dissemination of sexual content, sexual images of somebody who is under the age of 18. In California, actually now we as therapists, as mandated reporters, we have to report if there is the exchange of sexual content, such as sexting, images, and videos. It is a criminal offense. So I think that's really important for us to look at. Outside of the legal ramifications, though, it can definitely lead to bullying and harassment. I think this photo, if you can see the slides, I love this image. This was actually a SafeNet. This was a promotional, it was promotion for against sexting. And I love this image because if you look in the mirror, this woman, if for people that are phoning in, this woman is taking a photo of herself without her top on. And in the reflection of the mirror is all these other people who are looking at the image. And so that really shows once you send this image out, all these other people are going to be receiving it. Links to depression and suicidal ideation. That's also something really significant that research is starting to show around sexting. This is just kind of an emerging area of research right now, but there is potential for depression and suicidal ideation. Going back to that bullying and harassment, if there's an image of somebody that gets released to their school, and this happens, I know that many of us have probably heard this story, somebody releases an image of them to the school, they become then harassed or they get bullied, and for adolescents, again, it feels like the end of the world for them. And so this is really serious. I love that picture too. Somebody just commented on that. Does the law apply to FaceTime? You know what? I don't know each specific, I have to be honest, I don't know each state's specific law because each state probably has it written differently. But I would look into your own state and see how that law does apply to FaceTime. This is really important. I'm going to get into this. We've got about 5 more minutes, so I want to make sure that we talk about this because I know that there was questions. There's not even number one thing. There's so many things, you guys, and this is another piece that I get really passionate about because our number one place to prevent kind of any negative ramifications is with parent-teen communication or caregiver-teen communication. Okay, I'm going to go through it really quickly because I want to make sure to hit a lot of points. Number one, this is not a conversation that just should happen one time. This is a conversation that needs to happen over time. Not only is our adolescent aging, not only are they being exposed to many different things, but in order for an adolescent to feel as though their parent is really open and willing to talk to them, they need to know that that their parent is there to hear them. And I'm going to tell you the first time you most likely, depending on your relationship, but if I was to generalize, the first time you probably bring this up with your adolescent, you'll get responses something like, I know that, I don't want to talk about that, I know all these things, they told me these things in school, or you, mom, dad, I'm not doing that. Okay, whether or not they're doing it, there's conversation about it, they're talking about it, they're probably being exposed to it somehow, some way. So I really encourage you to continue to bring this conversation up. What we find in the research is that there is a direct positive association between a parent's communication with their adolescent about sex and sexuality and a teen's use of a condom and communicate. I'm sorry, there was just something inappropriate that was written in our chat, and it distracted me for a second. But that there's this positive association between a parent's communication and the adolescent's use of a condom and being able to communicate with a sexual partner. Communication with a sexual partner is of utmost importance because no matter what age they're at, it's about being able to communicate with your partner, protect yourself, be engaged with your partner, be relational with your partner, and be intimate. And so as a parent, you start modeling how to have those intimate conversations. Talk about those hard things. Talk about the difficult things. It's going to reduce your adolescent's risk of STDs. It's going to reduce your adolescent's risk of HIV infection. It's going to increase their use of condoms. Additionally, I want to encourage fathers to become involved in this, or male caregiver to become involved in this conversation. What we find with research is mothers or the female caregiver tends to be the primary kind of disseminator of this information and maybe is even more comfortable. But when we look at long-term studies, we actually find that adolescents who are then in their 20s or whatever, it might be 20s, early 30s, actually report that they wish that their father had become involved in those conversations as well. Girls talk about they wish that their dads would have talked to them about boys or talk about how to have these conversations with boys. And so it's really of utmost importance that both parents, if available, or two caregivers, if available, are really involved in this conversation. It's not an easy conversation. It's a difficult conversation. It's awkward. Parents often wonder about when is the good time to start having this conversation. I say earlier the better, and in an age-appropriate way. So when we're talking about porn, you might want to start talking about porn around ages 10 and 11. And I'm going to say that that's just from the communities I work in, the schools that I work in. By age 10, 11, adolescents know, those preteens know what online pornography is. But if you're able to start talking with them early on about just their bodies and what are the feelings inside of our bodies, and, you know, do we have different feelings in our bodies at different times, you're already setting the platform to have these conversations. And even if you haven't started having those conversations yet, start now, you know, like just start it now. And the one thing I say is adolescents can pick up on if their parent or their caregiver isn't being genuine. One of the number one things is about, there's a lot of number one things if you notice on this slide, but I say it because I think this is so important. But one of the things that is really important is that teens perceive their parent to be open and trustworthy, and that teens perceive that what the information that their parent is giving them is valid, right? And part of that is also, as the parent, is being really honest about what's coming up for you. So own it. You know, let them know that you have discomfort. Like, hey, this is hard for me too. I feel a little uncomfortable. We've never talked about this. I don't know how to talk about this, but I love you and I want to protect you, and I want you to know that I do want to talk about these things. And I'm sorry we haven't talked about them in the past, but I'm going to keep bringing them up with you so that you know that you can talk to me. And again, revisiting that conversation, no matter how many times they shut you down. You know, you can also introduce it while they're talking about a friend. I don't know, some situations come up and you're like, oh, you know, I wonder, do you know if so-and-so's doing this or that, or has this ever happened to you, or whatever it might be. Engage in that conversation. Have both caregivers, if available, engage in that conversation. Know that by engaging in this conversation, research shows us that you are actually protecting your child, and it's beneficial for your child. Okay, let's see. I think that's it, you guys. I hope I made it in time. Yes, 1 o'clock. Awesome. I do see, sorry I missed your answer about the tracking apps for Apple's iPhone, Snapchat. I said I am not aware of an application. Right now I know of many different filters, et cetera, but I am going to ask somebody that I know who would probably most likely know that. So if you want to email CHS, if you want that answer after I ask this person, who I'm pretty sure would be able to let me know, I'm happy to write you back. I don't know of any apps right now, but I'm happy to let you know. Okay. So you guys, I'm going to wrap it up. We are on the 1 o'clock hour. I want to thank you all for joining me today, sticking with me, getting through all of this information. I'm so happy we got through all of this information. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to reach out to CHS if you want to get in contact with me. And that's it, I guess, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Now I got to figure out how to... Oh, there we go. There's
Thank you so much. Thanks, Piper. Great information. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint and Piper's references, you can email me at tom@centerforhealthysex.com, and we'll get a copy of that to you. Also, if you want to watch the recording, it's going to be available on our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/centerforhealthysex. Please join us next month on October 9th when we'll be hosting Neil Cannon from Colorado, and he'll be speaking about mismatched libidos, helping couples close the gap in sexual desire. All right. Have a great month, and thank you, Piper. I'll see you soon.
Bye, you guys.
Have a great day,
thank
everyone.
you. Bye.